Faith isn't just belief. It's a journey through storms to peace beyond words. Hello. My name is Emily Carter. I am 28 years old. I live in a quiet town in the English countryside called Ashford, a place where everyone knows each other, and life feels simple on the surface. But inside, I've wrestled with questions about faith, hope, and trust for as long as I can remember. This story I'm about to share isn't just about belief in God. It's about the different stages of faith I've walked through, how I've cried out, waited, doubted, and finally found a peace I never expected. It's the journey from desperation to quiet confidence, and it's one I think many will recognize. Growing up, faith was something I inherited rather than chose. My parents were regular churchgoers who believed without question. For me, it was different. I wasn't sure what to believe, but I wanted to feel safe, to know there was something bigger holding all the chaos at bay. I remember those first moments of reaching out, the shaky prayers whispered in the dark when fear or pain pressed in too hard. But even then, I didn't know faith was a journey with stages. Some days I was close to God. Other days I felt abandoned, as if my prayers bounced off an empty sky. When life first began to challenge my faith, I was 22 and struggling with uncertainty. I'd lost my job in a small local bookstore, and suddenly the future looked bleak. Money was tight, and the fear of failure hung over me like a storm cloud. I cried out in prayer, "Please help me." But the answers didn't come. My heart was full of questions and my prayers were raw and simple. Nothing polished or perfect, just honest desperation. It was a fragile sort of faith, the kind that reaches out like a child to a parent, hoping to find safety in arms that might not seem to move fast enough. That first stage of faith, the faith that asks, is where many of us begin. It's the starting point, the door we step through when life breaks us open and we have no choice but to cling to something beyond ourselves. I remember the quiet nights spent reading a single verse over and over, trying to anchor my heart when everything else felt like it was falling apart. It wasn't about miracles yet. It was about finding a hand to hold, even if that hand felt invisible. This was the beginning of something, though I didn't know it at the time. But faith isn't meant to stay there. It grows, stretches, and sometimes it must wait, to be tested, to be refined. That waiting was the hardest part, when silence seemed louder than any answer. I'll tell you about that next. When the prayers I sent into the quiet night sky didn't bring the swift answers I longed for, I found myself facing something far more difficult than doubt. It was the waiting. The waiting wasn't just a gap between my desperate cries and some miraculous response. It was a vast, heavy silence that swallowed all my words and left me wondering if God had turned away. I remember the nights in that small flat in Ashford, the shadows stretching long across bare walls, the clock ticking louder than ever. The silence pressed in, and with it came a storm of questions that shook me to my core. But here's the thing I slowly learned. Waiting isn't abandonment. It's a test, a classroom where faith is not just about asking but about learning to trust. Trust when the door remains closed, when the phone stays silent, when no sign appears to reassure you. Trust that even if nothing changes on the surface, something is happening beneath. It's the kind of faith that Abraham had, 25 long years waiting for a promise to take shape. Or Joseph, forgotten in a prison cell for years, still holding on to hope. Waiting refines faith like fire refines gold. It strips away the shallow and reveals what's true and strong beneath. At first, I thought I was failing. I kept wondering, did I get it wrong? Is God ignoring me? The doubts whispered loudest when the silence stretched on and on. But slowly, I began to change how I prayed. Instead of pleading for answers, I started praying short prayers of thanks, small moments of gratitude for the little things. A warm cup of tea, a friend's smile, a quiet morning walk. I learned to rest in God's character, not just in what He could do for me. My prayers shifted from, "Why won't you move?" to, "Who are you in this waiting?" It was in that waiting, in that silence, where my faith began to deepen. I started to understand that God's timing isn't like the ticking of my clock. It's a rhythm I couldn't control but had to learn to follow. The waiting was teaching me endurance, patience, and a trust one hadn't had before. But the hardest lesson? To keep walking forward, even when I still had tears in my eyes and no clear path ahead. It's the steady, quiet trust that marks the second stage of faith, the faith that trusts. It's not naive or blind. It's a firm belief that God's hands are still moving, even when I can't see it. I remember the day I told a close friend, "If all I have left is God, that's enough." And truly it was, because trust doesn't demand answers. It rests in the heart of the one who holds the answers. But just when I thought I was beginning to understand this kind of faith, life had another surprise in store for me. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about God, trust, and what it means to truly believe. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a strange kind of peace. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because I was learning to live with them differently. I wasn't just hoping for change anymore. I was learning to live with God's presence even when the answers stayed hidden. It was as if my heart was moving into a new room, one where the noise of fear and desperation was quieter, replaced by a calm I hadn't known before. This was the moment I realized my faith was moving beyond just asking or trusting. It was beginning to abide. Abiding faith isn't about chasing miracles or begging for breakthroughs. It's about living deeply connected to God, like a branch clinging to a vine. The life I once sought through answers was now flowing through me simply because I stayed close to the source. I remember the mornings I'd sit by my window in Ashford, the soft light filtering through the curtains, my Bible open but my lips silent, just letting God's presence wash over me. In this new space, prayer wasn't a desperate plea but a quiet conversation, a rhythm of being rather than doing. I stopped measuring God by what He could give me and started noticing what He was doing within me. Felt like a secret shift, subtle but profound. The fear that once gripped me loosened its hold, replaced by a steady confidence that no storm outside could shake. I was no longer defined by what I lacked or what hadn't happened yet. Instead, I was rooted in something unshakable. I think back to the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before everything changed. He prayed with deep anguish, asking if there was another way, but then surrendered with a peace that came from knowing God's plan was better than his own. That's the faith I was beginning to glimpse, the faith that doesn't fight God's will but rests in it, no matter what. But abiding faith isn't passive or weak. It's a quiet strength that carries you through the hardest moments without crumbling. It's the kind of faith that doesn't panic when plans fall apart, that forgives when it's easiest to hold a grudge, that loves even when it hurts. I noticed how I was becoming more patient, more compassionate, more willing to let go of control. Yet, even as I settled into this deeper place, life threw me a curveball I never saw coming. Just when I thought I understood where this journey was taking me, everything shifted again. A sudden opportunity appeared. A chance to step into a new job, in a city I had never imagined living in. But the strange thing was, I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't chasing the job as a solution. I was content simply because I had found something far greater than any position or paycheck. That moment felt like the peak of everything I'd been through, the quiet miracle inside me that had transformed my heart. But there was one more twist waiting, one that would test everything I thought faith was about and force me to confront a question I hadn't dared to ask. Was I truly ready to live the faith that abides no matter what came next? The unexpected job offer came like a whisper in the wind. A phone call from a London firm I had only heard about in passing. They said my name had come up during a meeting, that someone had recommended me without knowing my story. Felt surreal. But unlike before, I didn't rush or clutch at it with desperation. I had learned to breathe in the space between hope and fear, to rest in the quiet confidence that if this was meant to be, it would be. If not, I was already at peace. I remember the day I told my closest friend about the offer while sitting in a small cafe on the edge of Ashford. The sky was soft with the late afternoon sun, and the air smelled faintly of blooming jasmine. I smiled and said something I never expected to say. The job isn't the miracle. The miracle already happened inside me. It was true. The months of silence, waiting, and wrestling with faith had reshaped me. The peace that settled in my heart was no longer dependent on circumstances. But then, just as I was ready to step into this new chapter, a letter arrived. A letter that shattered the calm I'd worked so hard to build. It was from an old friend, someone I hadn't heard from in years, someone whose words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The letter spoke of secrets, doubts, and a crisis of faith that mirrored my own journey, but twisted in ways I couldn't have imagined. It hinted at choices made in the shadows, at truths hidden beneath years of smiles and prayers. Suddenly, the story I thought I was living felt incomplete. The faith I had nurtured was being tested in ways I never expected. The calm I had found trembled under the weight of this new revelation. Was my peace real, or just a fragile illusion waiting to crack? Could I truly abide in faith when the foundation beneath me seemed to shift? The next steps felt uncertain, the path ahead shrouded in fog. But one thing was clear. This journey was far from over. The faith that asks, the faith that trusts, and the faith that abides, they weren't just stages I'd passed through. They were doors leading to deeper mysteries, to challenges that would push me beyond comfort into a place where faith demanded more than belief. It demanded surrender. And now, standing at this crossroads, I'm left with a question that haunts me every day. What does it really mean to abide in faith when everything familiar falls away? The answer, I sense, is waiting just beyond the horizon. But will I be ready when it comes? The letter weighed heavily in my hands as I sat by the window of my flat, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. It was from Sophie, my closest friend from university, the one person who had known me when my faith was fragile and raw. But her words were different now. They trembled with doubt, pain, and a truth I hadn't expected to hear. Sophie confessed she had been struggling for years, wrestling with questions she felt ashamed to voice, and had recently drifted away from the church we once loved. More than that, she hinted at a secret she'd kept hidden, something that could change everything I thought I knew about our shared past. My mind raced as I reread her letter, trying to piece together what she meant. Was this some kind of betrayal? A breaking point? Or was it a cry for help? Much like the prayers I had whispered in the darkest nights? The thought that someone so close to me was walking a path shadowed by doubt shook me to the core. It contradicted the peace I'd found, the faith I'd grown into. Suddenly, my journey wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reaching out to someone lost in the silence, someone who might need the very faith I had struggled so hard to build. I realized then that faith was not a solitary journey. It was messy, tangled, and often intertwined with the lives of those around us. The quiet confidence I'd settled into was challenged by the reality that others might still be crying out, still waiting in silence. The letter forced me to confront a deeper question. How do you hold onto abiding faith when those you love are falling away? When the foundation you thought was solid feels like it's shifting beneath your feet? That night, sleep evaded me. I sat in the stillness, the letter propped open on my lap, and I prayed. Not for answers, but for courage. Courage to face the unknown, to step into the shadows with a heart open enough to hold both doubt and hope. I knew that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where faith would be tested not just by silence or waiting, but by the raw reality of human brokenness and the messy grace needed to walk through it. As dawn crept over Ashford, painting the sky with soft pinks and grays, I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Faith that abides isn't just about resting in God's presence when life is peaceful. It's about standing firm when the storms come, when the silence deepens, and when the people we love are lost in their own battles. And so, with Sophie's letter folded carefully and my heart pounding, I made a decision. I would not turn away. I would not let fear or doubt silence me. I would walk the path of faith, not alone, but reaching out, abiding, and holding on to hope even when the way was unclear. What happens next? Well, that's a story for another time. But I promise you this. It's a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about faith, and maybe, just maybe, change the way you see it forever. The days that followed Sophie's letter were a whirlwind of emotions. Confusion, sadness, and an unexpected surge of determination. I knew I couldn't ignore what she had shared, yet the fear of what lay ahead gnawed at me. How do you approach someone whose faith is crumbling? How do you offer hope when you've walked through your own shadows? But amidst the uncertainty, I felt a quiet pull inside me. a calling to be present, to listen, and to share the faith that had carried me this far. I reached out to her, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe nestled in a cobbled street just off Ashford's High Road. I remember walking there that chilly afternoon, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my boots, my breath visible in the crisp air. Sophie was already there when I arrived, seated by the window, her eyes shadowed but her smile tentative. She wore a simple navy dress, paired with a delicate silver necklace, a piece I'd given her years ago, a reminder of better days. Our conversation began cautiously, like two dancers testing the rhythm. She spoke of her doubts, the unanswered prayers, the silence that felt like rejection, the loneliness of feeling abandoned by God. Her voice trembled as she recounted nights spent wrestling with the question of whether faith was enough. I shared my own journey, the desperate cries, the long waiting, the slow learning to abide. We talked about the storms we'd each faced, the moments faith had faltered, and the surprising peace that sometimes flickered in the darkness. What struck me most was the raw honesty between us, the vulnerability that opened a door to something deeper than words. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about holding space for the questions. Together, we began to explore what it meant to trust not just in miracles, but in a God who meets us in the silence, who abides even when our hearts feel broken. That day marked a turning point, not just for Sophie, but for me too. I realized that abiding faith isn't a solitary refuge. It's a shared journey. It's about walking alongside others, even when the path is uncertain and the destination unclear. It's about living faith out loud, with all its doubts and hopes tangled together. As we left the cafe, the sky had softened to a dusky blue, and a gentle rain began to fall. We didn't know what lay ahead, but we stepped forward together, ready to face the unknown with faith that refuses to let go. And just when I thought this chapter was closing, life had one more twist to reveal. A secret from the past that would challenge everything I thought I understood about trust, forgiveness, and the power of faith itself. But that is a story for another time, one that will test the very roots of faith I have come to hold so dear. The secret arrived unexpectedly, wrapped in a faded envelope that slipped through the letterbox on a damp, gray morning. Its handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant but hurried, stirring a mix of curiosity and unease deep in my chest. I hesitated before opening it, the weight of Sophie's letter still fresh in my mind. But something urged me forward, a need to face whatever shadows lingered in the corners of my story. Inside was a confession from someone I had once trusted, a person from my past who had chosen silence over truth, and in doing so had broken more than just promises. The words revealed choices made behind my back, betrayals hidden beneath years of smiles and shared prayers. It was a fracture I hadn't seen coming, and it shook the foundation of everything I believed about trust and faith. I read and reread the letter, my hands trembling. How could someone so close have kept this from me? The anger and hurt surged like a storm, threatening to drown the quiet peace I'd fought so hard to build. But beneath the pain, a deeper question took root. If faith is about abiding in God's presence, can it survive the betrayal of those we love? Can trust be rebuilt when the cracks run this deep? That night, I sat alone in my flat, the city lights flickering beyond the window. The betrayal felt like a thunderclap in the stillness of my faith journey. I wrestled with silence and sorrow, anger and forgiveness, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't unravel. I wanted to retreat, to shut the door on the pain and hide in the peace I'd found. But something inside me whispered that faith was more than comfort. It was courage. I realized that abiding faith doesn't mean ignoring the wounds or pretending everything is perfect. It means offering those broken places to God, trusting He can heal even the deepest scars. It means standing firm when the ground shifts beneath you, choosing grace over bitterness, hope over despair. It's not easy. It's messy and raw, but it's real. In the days that followed, I reached out to that person, not to accuse or condemn, but to seek truth and, if possible, forgiveness. The conversations were painful and honest, filled with tears and regret, but they opened a door to healing I hadn't thought possible. Through that process, I saw a glimpse of the faith I had been chasing all along, Not a faith that demands perfection, but one that embraces brokenness and still says, I will trust. This chapter of my journey reminded me that faith is alive, growing through storms, silence, and even betrayal. It's not a neat story with tidy endings, but a wild, unpredictable path that calls us deeper into God's heart and into the messy reality of human love. And just when I thought I had faced the darkest night, a new light began to dawn, a revelation that would change everything once again. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. The revelation came quietly, like a soft breeze stirring the stillness of a long, dark night. It wasn't a thunderous event or a sudden miracle, but a gentle unfolding that caught me off guard. As I continued to wrestle with the aftermath of betrayal and the fragile threads of trust, I discovered something profound. Faith isn't just about what we hold on to. Sometimes, it's about what we're willing to let go. One evening, as I sat in the small garden behind my flat, the cool air filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses, I opened my journal and began to write. Not prayers or pleas, but raw reflections of my heart. The anger, the pain, the hope, and the quiet resilience that had taken root. It was in that moment of honesty that I felt it. A deep peace settling over me, not because everything was fixed, but because I was learning to abide in a faith that could hold the tension of brokenness and grace side by side. I realized that the highest level of faith, the faith that abides, is not a place of perfection or constant joy. It's a place of steady presence, where peace and pain coexist, where doubts and trust mingle, and where the heart remains connected to God even when life doesn't make sense. It's the calm in the storm, the quiet strength that doesn't need to prove itself because it's rooted in something unshakable. That night, as the stars blinked softly overhead, I whispered a prayer, not for answers or miracles, but for the courage to keep walking this path, to keep abiding, even when the road is uncertain, to keep trusting, even when the silence lingers, to keep loving, even when wounds run deep. And as I closed my journal, I knew this journey was far from over. Faith is not a destination but a lifelong dance, a rhythm of asking, trusting, abiding, and sometimes falling and rising again. It's messy, beautiful, and deeply human. So here I stand, at the edge of what I know and the mystery ahead, holding on to a faith that refuses to let go. And as I look forward, I'm reminded that the greatest miracles often happen not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet, persistent heartbeat of a soul that chooses to abide. What lies beyond this moment? I don't know, but I'm ready to find out. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about walking forward when the path is hidden. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 28 years old, living in the quiet town of Ashford in England. Over the years, my journey with faith has been anything but straightforward. I've cried out in desperation, wrestled through long seasons of waiting, and learned to rest in a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. This story is about that journey, how faith grew in me through storms, silence, betrayal, and unexpected grace. It's a deeply personal path that I believe many of us share, even if our stories look different on the outside. Faith, I've discovered, isn't a single moment or a fixed state. It's a journey through different levels and seasons. There have been times when my prayers felt like desperate cries in the dark, searching for rescue. Other times, faith was a quiet trust that held steady even when nothing seemed to change. And then there were moments, rare and precious, when faith became a deep, abiding presence, a calm connection to God that carried me through life's hardest trials. What I've learned is that faith never stays put. It grows like a seed needing sunlight, rain, and time before bearing fruit. Sometimes it trembles with uncertainty. Other times it stands firm like an ancient oak. And though the road has been winding and filled with surprises, it has brought me closer to a peace I once thought was only for others. This story isn't about perfection or easy answers. It's about real faith, messy, raw, and alive. And as I share it, I invite you to ask yourself, where is your faith today? Are you still crying out, waiting quietly, or have you found the peace that comes from simply abiding? Wherever you are, know that faith is always moving, always growing, and always inviting you deeper. So, Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when my faith was just a fragile cry for help, a place I believe many of us start. When life first knocked the wind out of me, my faith was nothing but a trembling whisper, a desperate plea sent into the silence. I was 22, living in a cramped flat on the edge of Ashford, struggling to keep my head above water after losing my job at the local bookstore. The steady rhythm of my life shattered overnight, leaving me aching with fear and uncertainty. I remember those nights vividly, sitting by the window, hands clenched in prayer, voice barely more than a whisper. Please help me. At that time, my faith was raw and unpolished, much like a child reaching out to a parent after a fall. Clumsy, unsure, but trusting that safety awaited in those arms. I didn't have the right words or theological answers. I only had a heart full of pain and a hope that someone was listening. The prayers weren't grand or eloquent. They were simple cries for mercy, healing, and relief. It was a fragile kind of faith, the kind that lives in the asking. I clung to it because it was all I had. I remember reading a verse from the Bible over and over, trying to anchor myself when the fear threatened to swallow me whole. The faith that asks is not about immediate miracles or perfect belief. It's about admitting you can't fix everything yourself and reaching out for help, even with trembling hands. But this stage of faith is also filled with challenges. When the answers don't come quickly, doubt creeps in. I found myself comparing my struggles to others who seemed to have it all figured out, wondering if God's love was somehow less for me. And when small miracles did come, I wanted more, faster, hungrier than ever. It's human to want quick fixes, but God's timing had a different lesson for me. One about patience, presence, and trusting beyond what I could see. What I learned to do, slowly, was to stay a little longer in the silence after my prayers. Instead of rushing away, I lingered in the quiet, letting a fragile peace begin to breathe inside me. I started reading one verse slowly, writing down small things I was grateful for, whispering prayers of thanks before sleep. These simple acts became anchors for my heart, helping my faith grow from a desperate cry into a steady rhythm. If you find yourself here, crying out, unsure, and waiting, don't be ashamed. This is where faith begins for many of us. Reach out like a child, raw and real. But after you cry, stay close. Let the silence be a place where your faith can start to take root. Because even if the miracles feel distant, every prayer you offer is shaping a peace inside you that will one day surprise you. This was my beginning, the fragile faith that asks. But it was only the first step on a journey that would take me far beyond desperation into something deeper. The journey that would teach me how to trust when silence stretches on and how to abide when life feels uncertain. And that journey is where I found a faith that changed everything.